Welcome to the ITOT Insider Podcasts. So, David, who did we bring today?
Yeah, so really interesting here because we're gonna, I would say, go back to the roots. We're gonna talk about what it is to build an OT organization. We brought Anton Melander here. Anton, thank you so much for joining. Anton used to work for Northvolt in several roles, and now is the founder or co-founder, I have to say, of a startup we're also going to talk about. But yeah, Anton, thank you so much. And why don't you start this episode with a bit of your story? Yeah? Where did you start? What have you seen, etc.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. This story probably starts with my short about myself. I'm Anton, as you mentioned. I'm Swedish, born and raised. Studied something called Industrial Engineering and Management with a master in computer science at a school called KTH here in Stockholm. And after that, I basically had two options: either go down an offer from an investment bank or join a small company at the time called Northvolt that was supposed to be making battery cells. And since I'm here, it's pretty obvious which route I took. And when I joined, the company was about 100 employees, had no factories, no nothing pretty much. And I joined in the digitalization department, which at the time was, I think, me and three others. Starting out, we were like, this is going to be a greenfield factory, trying to figure out what should we build, what should we buy off the market. And the only thing we knew was that making batteries is fast. You tend to make a lot of batteries very quickly, and it's very tight tolerances. So even small, like microns of misalignment can lead to short circuits and so on. And we really wanted to, since this was in 2018, we really wanted to make sure that we could be as data-driven as possible when it came to scale up production and learn how we can take new chemistries into large-scale production. And we also knew that we were not going to get it right the first time. So we wanted to make sure. Yeah, exactly. We wanted to make sure that we had a lot of flexibility and kind of could learn as we were going along. So we ended up building quite a lot of software in-house, and I was fortunate enough to have a kind of a leadership position in digitalization, and we grew that from about 4 to 140 people as the company grew from 100 to about 5,000. And then I left Northvolt.
So wait. 4 to?
So
140.
Something like that.
Jesus. For digitalization, right?
Yeah, and the company grew from about 100 to 5,000 during
But even then, if you look at the amount of people on digitalization compared to the total company, that's quite a significant part.
Yeah.
So, and also understood, you guys were building it yourself, or were you like combining off-the-shelf software? What do I need to think about when I think about a battery factory?
Yeah. So we built. So this was 2018. OPC UA started becoming more mainstream. We had to still make sure all of our PLC providers, came with an OPC UA server. There weren't a lot like IoT platforms capable of kind of ingesting the amount of data that we wanted. So we built the whole IoT platform, and actually used provisioning all the edge gateways was a challenge itself. I think we provisioned over 1,000 gateways over that period. So just the whole provisioning process was something we kind of had to build up ourselves, and also the IoT platform. And in the beginning, we were very focused on making sure we could capture as much data as we needed from the different process steps in production. And then as the company kind of actually started running production, it was more about how can we make operators and organization use this data as efficiently as possible. So then we created something we called North Cloud, which was the internal MES. So we did build a lot in-house, and it was, I would say, very competent. Although of course we leveraged AWS for cloud services. We had, we bought our PLM, our ERP, and these kind of things.
Okay, so Could you maybe walk us through what OT means in the context of Northvolt, of battery factory?
So, I mean, the first layer was kind of the data capturing and the edge devices. So for each PLC, we had an edge device that would pull data off and stream it up to the cloud. And then we organized the organization around the kind of core functions in the organization. So we had one team focusing on enabling the operations team to know what was supposed to be produced, how much did they produce, how much downtime did they have, what were the performance, etc. And then we had another part of the North Cloud product that was focusing on the quality department. So that came in more to like, what is the product that we're making, and do they meet the quality specifications and so on. And then we were focused around the material flow. So what parts should be where and when. And for that we used, I think we had 7 different AGV suppliers, each having their own AGV fleet management system.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we had to talk to that and kind of coordinate that as well, based on how the production were going, and also how the yield and the quality was.
That already so many questions, which yeah, but it's interesting, Anton, because this is a question. Okay, it has for those who don't know, an unfortunate ending. Northvolt isn't a company anymore. I'm sure that has nothing to do with the quality of your tools, but it is still. You start from scratch. It's a pure greenfield
with 4 people.
Yeah. So you start from literally nothing. So you have the on the one hand, you have the possibility to make choices, and that has pros and cons, because there is there are obviously stories from other companies and experience from people at other companies to fall back on. But for you, for your team, for your company, there is no previous experience, so that you have to pick a certain starting point and a certain direction.
I mean, you're completely right. The chief digital officer at the time he was early at Tesla and with quite a lot of like ex-Tesla people. So I think they brought a wealth of experience and do's and don'ts with them. But I think the situation we were like, the main decision we needed to make was like, should we go with an off the shelf, which typically means you need to be very kind of explicit of what you need. This a long requirements list, and you typically rely on consultants. And that would be we would definitely do a lot of change orders and not really be in control of that destiny. And also like their software didn't really meet the needs in data ingest that we foresaw. Or should we build it in-house? So that was the tough decision to be made.
One of the let's go into organizational stuff a bit later in the podcast, because I also like that. But let's stay a bit technical for now. One of the things we often talk about is when you approach data as a platform, is the scaling issue. So you come across so many issues when scaling. There is the technology itself. Can it ingest so much data? There is the egress, of course, which is not non-trivial. There is for example, the data contextualization, the data modeling. Where do you start? What standards do you pick, etc. Now, when you start from scratch, that obviously gives you some extra degrees of freedom compared to starting from a brownfield. So can you also, where did you start? How did you make sure that the platform was scalable? How did you, for example, deal with data modeling?
So where I think I spent the first year during my time there was because this was when we were sending out RFQs for our equipment makers, and this is typically not like off the shelf machines. At least it wasn't. So we had quite a lot of influence on how the OPC UA server should look like, and kind of the state model of the machines. What is like, we talked a lot about most of the machines were kind of discrete, like they ran in cycles. Although we also had like continuous production of the active like cathode material. But for most of the time, we define our own like standard interface that they had to comply with. So what should OPC UA look like? Or like the server structure, like the tag structure.
Yeah.
And I think like had we redone this today, we'd probably have used like the UNS or something like that to help this. But we did build like a factory. We call it the factory breakdown system. It took like that, factory lines, machines, and then we standardized on like how we differentiate like process parameters and product measurements. So a lot of it started like on the PLC, and then we had our mappers that sat on the gateway that were talking to the PLC and sending packages of data mapped into our standard format for that machine. So that's where we started, and then we saw. And I think this is the interesting thing with manufacturing. So take an example as measuring your performance, which is, you need to know your ideal cycle time, and the PLC is not going to know the ideal cycle time, and that might even differ depending on the kind of product that you're making currently. So that you need to source somewhere else, and where do you combine these and actually look at the actual cycle time versus the target cycle time to calculate your performance. So yeah.
But what made you, like, from an organizational perspective, how were you organized, and how, especially more specifically, how did you see the organization actually changing when going from 4 to 140?
Yeah. Okay. So in the beginning, we were very much of like, project based. We worked with, we knew we needed to standardize kind of interfaces across machines to not end up in like too heterogeneous data from the source. So that was like a project to standardize, and then obviously working with the process engineers as they were ordering and specifying the machines. But and that kind of, up until we were like 12, 15 people, it worked pretty well to use, like, the whole organization was extremely flat. Everyone was working with everyone wherever needed. But then as the company got to maybe 300-400, digitalization became 15-20 people. We needed some structure. So at some point I was the PMO. So then we became more serious about like running projects and prioritizing projects based on kind of, I would say to some degree, feature needs. Like, this is the features that is needed. But at some point, when production actually kicked off and we had our first small-sized factory in just outside of Stockholm, we also realized that technology is one thing, but it's like, unless it actually does what it needs for the people it needs to do it for, it doesn't really matter. So I think this was a pretty rough period where we went from a very like project-oriented way of working into a product-oriented way of working. And with product, I mean, like, we were actually setting out like, here's a bunch of core capabilities of the platform that needs to work, and they need to help this department achieve these outcomes. So like, you can't really work with quality unless you know this product had this quality and it failed for this reason, and you kind of need to start be able to categorize and group non-conformity reasons so you go after ones that have the biggest impact and severity and so on. So it became, I think that's a major thing. We moved from project into a product organization.
You could write a book about that.
Yeah, probably.
But yeah, there is even a book called From Project to Product by was the author Mick Kersten. Yeah,
it's actually
a brilliant book.
Right?
But it's easy to say this, Anton, but I would say the reality is, I would say, much more difficult than just saying like, we're going into this product mindset. That's again something non-trivial. What are your, I would say, if you look back at it, what are some maybe some good, bad, and ugly, or only good and bad, whatever you come up with, things you can warn or mention to our listeners, like, if you're thinking about going into this product mindset, these and these things, they are super important, but hey, these and these things, these are common pitfalls.
That's a good one. One of the biggest challenges, because we were our customers, so to speak, or stakeholders, were our colleagues. So and obviously there were always more. The backlog kept growing forever. So like prioritizing is sometimes like really difficult part where, you know, there are the things you need to do because like, you know, we can't run this process. So like this is gonna be way too slow unless we get the support from you. And that might sound really important, and there might be, you know, internal stakeholders that are very loud, you know, really pushes for their thing. But sometimes you need to do the things like that. Doesn't mean you actually need moving the needle of you know, are we meeting the right business results because of this? So trying to, you know, tie down all of the initiatives to actual like quantifiable outputs and quantifiable results. I think that was one of the most difficult part to do. And sometimes you would, you know, have some really senior stakeholders telling you this is the most important thing, and you'd be like, but it's actually not going to increase our quality. It's not going to increase our throughput. So, and these were the most important things always for Northvolt. So like, how do you deal with that and the kind of internal politics and so on?
Yeah, that's
yeah. With the ever increasing backlogs, ideas are cheap.
Yeah,
they're the easiest part of any project.
And the other thing I would probably say, the thing I would look out for is how you manage your master data. So as I mentioned, you can't really do OEE unless you have somewhere to, you know, what is the target cycle time for this machine, or if you don't know the planned uptime, you can't really estimate your downtime, or you have to assume it. And I think making that easy, like it's very easy to kind of draw out this perfect architecture of how different system owns different data and how they interact. But that also makes the whole kind of the speed of the organization kind of dependent on certain like technical achievements, which I think it should try to kind of minimize.
The story, as I already said, the story of Northvolt came to a way too early ending.
Yeah.
What was that like in the last, I would say, time, and what made you, I would say, what made you decide like, okay, this is the thing I'm gonna do next?
So I left in mid 2023, pretty much. So I was not there in the very end. But when I left, I think there was a fairly like the morale was really high, and I think that the progress was high, but apparently not high enough. But the reason why I left is so I had been working for Northvolt for almost 6 years. I had this experience of like building up both the technology and the teams around it, and I started thinking more about like, okay, the options we had were either we would go with off-the-shelf solutions, customized for our needs. I know that would have been expensive, or we built this internally, which we're also a fairly large team to do so. And we started looking, me and my co-founder were like, yeah, but how do all, like the majority, I think more than 90% of all manufacturing companies in the world are employs less than 200 people. So like, how do they deal with kind of digitalization in general?
Team of 140 people should solve it.
Yeah, probably not, right? So and it was this, yeah.
No. I didn't want to interrupt you, but you are totally right. Eh? Like that's also a bit the problem. The success stories which are shared in the world are almost exclusively from a rather small set of global players. Eh?
Yes, and I mean, the whole kind of the modern data stack is a thing, right? Like if you go to modern tech companies outside of the manufacturing sphere, you have like, you know, Fivetran and Snowflake and DBT and Tableau and all of this. And it's you know, essentially a very powerful stack of tools that demands a certain set of competences to set up and maintain. But if you look at like non-tech companies and especially manufacturing companies, they like that stack is not really accessible for them, and nor is paying like millions of dollars to consultants to digitize their operations. So they're kind of left with no really good options on the market. And I think you mentioned it a few times in this podcast, but like a lot of manufacturers, they live and breathe Excel. That's where like they consolidate data, aggregate data, do their analysis and reports.
That's how they vibe code. It's just using Excel.
Yeah, and that doesn't really scale. And actually, when we started running, we were trying to fix the problem at source. We were trying to build an MES that would be like easy, accessible, and easy to deploy, and highly customizable by non-technical people. But we also realized that actually to implement a like a transactional system, you need to kind of force change in the organization. Something needs to change. And change management is difficult, and it's risky, and that tends to be a risk that's kind of the barrier to get started tend to be pretty high. And what we saw, I think we spoke to, since we started, we've probably spoken to more than 300 like small mid-sized manufacturers, and although most of them would like higher quality data, what seems to be the more acute problem is that they have a lot of data, but they have a sense of not fully utilizing that data. And like, so there's probably more value in the data that they are able to access. So that's kind of the problem we're going after with Ronia now is really trying to plug into the data they already have and make it easy to access by non-technical people, both like from a visualization and an analytical point of view.
So what does that mean? Making it easier? Is that like really black and white here? Is it like creating a data lake? Because that's a typical answer, like, or at least on the IT side, like, so, well,
no, I mean, so to some degree, it's a data warehouse, but a data warehouse is not going to help too many people unless you can actually do something with it. So we do ingest data of various formats and shapes, and then we have a fairly opinionated kind of ontology and a data model for how we should represent, like, what is a cycle, what is an asset, what is a resource, and so on. And then we make it easy for people to visualize this data. So a bit like Power BI and Tableau, but also kind of drilling down in that data, inspired by like Jupyter notebooks, or like the way that the data scientists would do it.
That's quite the pivot also, yeah. If I look at it from let's build a package from something that I've been working on in the past, all the way to let's work on visualization.
It is.
Is that like the biggest problem that you were seeing compared to the MES part?
So I think the problem is like we're to a large degree still after the same problem, namely that empowering small and mid-sized manufacturers to be more efficient. But instead of trying to kind of control and help them run production, we help them make sense of the data that they have. And the most, like, in order to kind of work with these customers, you need to find like the tool must be very easy to get started with. And then it's easy to kind of sit on top of the existing data and let them kind of analyze the data more efficiently.
I think it makes sense because what you also said is like they already have lots of data. I think compared to, let's say, 20 years ago, getting the data was probably a bigger challenge than it is nowadays. It's more about how can I combine it easily and spend less time in Excel, even if you're a small manufacturer.
So I mean, the typical cases, they have some supply chain data in email, so whatever that might be, that says we have ordered this material, it should come this date. They have their production plan in Excel. They might have some PLC data in a historian, or they have operators kind of recording this manually. And then they try to understand: do we have the right capacity and the right people to deliver this order, and do we have enough material ordered for it? And the data is there. It's just like a lot of data crunching, and tends to be a lot of ad hoc kind of combining this data and drawing conclusions from it.
So you talk to 300-ish small mid-sized manufacturers, which is a if I just think about it from an agenda perspective, that's already like a huge effort. There has to be some other takeaways from these 300 conversations. I'm fully with you. They'll surely have a data or a data accessibility type of issue. What are some other takeaways from these conversations?
I mean, I guess it's the common things like, you know, aging population and attracting talent, the whole workforce, and like onboarding, educating people. I think that's a big one. And another takeaway is like a lot of the kind of C-suite people we talk to, they tend to have been in the company for quite a long time, and they are, you know, they really want to find ways to improve day-to-day operations. But like, if you're a too small company investing in MES, that's going to cost you a lot of money for 2 years. Like, if that fails, it's not good, obviously.
No,
so
and
like,
it blows your entire budgets for
yeah,
a couple of years as well.
yeah, and so like selling into these companies efficient and really like providing value needs to be, you need to find like what is the least path of resistance to get in and prove some value. And most typical like industrial software projects or product are sold as a project that goes for a certain period of time. And in many cases, that's absolutely needed. If you are putting in a new MES, new ERP, whatever, that's not a small feat. But these are also transactional systems. They need to you need to change the behavior of the whole organization typically.
Yeah.
And for a startup like ours, is, you know, no one would probably trust us to deliver both the product and the governance to kind of get this in. So you know, I think where we ended up with Ronnie now is you know, the barrier to get started is almost none. You can take the data as it is and start using it. And the interesting part of what customers that are using this today is saying is that they can focus on actually analyzing the data and trying to understand how to improve or find root causes, as opposed to spending a lot of time grabbing the data from different sources, thinking about how to structure the data in order to visualize it. So you can go from like messy data to a visualization and starting analysis much faster.
I think we're almost running at the end, David, but I do have one question. If you've talked and worked with a lot of the smaller manufacturing companies, which I think is a often forgotten domain, they have different challenges. How would you see digitalization work for them? Like if you would go a bit longer term, is it realistic for them to say we're going to have big teams and we're going to go fully on digitalization? How would it look like?
I don't know. I think it depends also the type of product that you're making. If you're highly specialized and you know, have a unique product, that's very different from if you're a commodity. But what we've seen with a lot of these smaller factories, like improving only like production and shop floor data might not actually have, it's hard to translate that to bottom line results. And I think that's the challenge. And they tend, like, you typically need to look at more sources of data from like suppliers, customers, production, how you go from, you know, a demand to a production plan. So I don't know if that's the thing. The thing that's kind of struck me, which is also something which made us kind of move away from the MES, is that the closer to the shop floor, the more unique each factory becomes, and they have their ins and outs that is highly unique.
Yeah.
And even if you could, you know, I guess vibe code an application that would fit for their needs, it's like you need to maintain that and kind of keep that going. But yeah, so I think like the closer you are, the more unique it is for the business. And if you can't deal with that yourself, you're gonna end up paying consultants a lot of money for it. So it's expensive. So I think, you know, I hope there is like some, like with the whole AI thing, that we can kind of, there's going to be a layer where you can put the custom things and then kind of feed that into something more generalizable.
think that's a perfect way to end this episode, or a perfect statement to end the episode. It's an interesting and not so easy to make trade-off.
Yeah.
One of the reasons, Willem and I also say that so many times, that's one of the, I would say, in manufacturing, yes, you're talking about long life cycles. Yes, you're talking about customization everywhere. And that has an effect on everything which flows, I would say, further downstream the data pipeline, so to say. But thank you so much, Anton, for sharing these insights from a very small team to become very, very big company, and then into the startup scene. Wishing you all the best with this endeavor. To our listeners, thank you again for tuning in. As you know, you can still subscribe to this podcast via ITOT.Insider.com. We also have our ITOT.Academy with new cohorts starting in January. So if you want to be trained in these topics, make sure to go to ITOT.Academy. See you next time when we bring you more insights in bridging the IT and OT world. And until then, take care. Bye-bye.